Susie Larson. Thanks for listening to the podcast of Susie Larson Live.
It's only just a matter of. It's only just a matter of. Sing, so the back row is your glide. 'Cause walking just won't do dance. You don't have to know how to. Ever since grace got you there.
Welcome to Susie Larson Live, a bonus podcast. Always so honored to get to spend this time with you. Well, today we're talking about my recent conversation with Kirk Cousins, and I can't think of anybody better for a post-game debrief than my friend Ryan Mitchell. He's a friend, he's a colleague, he serves as a producer for Faith Radio, and on the side, he works as a sportscaster. And I'm just saying, someday you're probably going to see him calling some big games. He's got a deep and profound faith. He's got amazing insights on sports. He is my go-to resource when I have questions about football. I appreciate him so much. He adds so much strength to our team. Ryan, welcome to the program.
Susie, thanks so much for having me. You're too kind.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we dig in and talk about my conversation with Kirk, I just got to ask you, as you spend time with the Lord these days, what's he been impressing upon your heart?
Yeah, I love that question. And listening to your show, Susie, often so much fruit comes out of just that one question to set up the rest of the conversation. So thank you for asking. I would say a question that God has been asking me recently and something that's been on my heart is, how do you handle change? So whether change be something that you know is coming in your life and that you can prepare for, whether that be good change or bad change in your life, or the changes that happen that you don't have time to brace for, if you will. You don't have time to prepare for. So he's been challenging in things that are going on in my own life personally, how I handle that, and then looking back at times in my life where I so badly wanted change to happen right now. And God, I did all the right things, and here I'm laying myself before you, but I'm not getting this change. And why is that? And I don't understand that. So it's been a wrestle for some time, and I feel like not too far after that question comes the word surrender, and that can feel like a trigger word, I'm sure, to so many people, and that would be myself included. What am I surrendering to God, and what am I maybe holding back? If I look deep down, what am I not surrendering right now? And to be honest with you, Susie, that's an everyday battle and a struggle for me. Every single day to wake up and say, I'm surrendering to Him, God be in the midst of every conversation I have, every person I come in contact with. In my drive into work, would I be surrendering that time to you as well if I just need to have time to pray with you and be still in that moment? So it's difficult and something that I'm still working on, but how do I get better at surrendering and then accepting the changes in life, whatever they may be? And I think about in Proverbs and going through that whole book with a friend of mine not too long ago in Bible study and how much I enjoyed that. But in Proverbs 19, where the Lord says, many are the plans in a man's heart, but the Lord is the one who determines his steps. And when you fear the Lord, it says a few verses later, you'll be safe, you'll be content and untouched by trouble. So am I actually fearing the Lord? And that goes in with being surrendered in my life. So how can I do better at that is a question I feel like that God has impressed on my heart here recently.
Wow, I can't even thank you enough for that wise insight. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, who doesn't have other areas in our lives that need to be surrendered? And I don't think we even realize how much we try to control until you hear something like what you just shared. And if we were to be humble enough and teachable enough to be able to search our hearts and go, okay, maybe I've surrendered my future, business or marriage prospects or whatever, but I am so controlling, this thing. And yet I would say that at every place of surrender is the potential of revival, because
Amen.
You really are blocking the flow of God's influence when you're saying, I've got this or I want this. So I think, wow, we should do really a whole show on surrender. I'm so glad I asked you that. You've given me some things to think about for the rest of the day. Well, Ryan, that we've got listeners from all over the world, but we got a good number of listeners from Minnesota. So I just got to ask you, you're my most favorite person to talk football with because you're a wealth of wisdom. And, I love the game, but there's so much still I don't know. But I follow like 6 teams at a time, so I'm probably more crazy than most. But when you heard Kirk was leaving Minnesota, what were your initial feelings, and did you see that coming?
Yeah, I follow it pretty closely with, beat writers and guys who cover the team and trying to figure out what's happening in free agency in the month of March. So I remember exactly where I was when I saw the news that he's going to Atlanta and signing there. And I was a bit upset and I was bummed, but I wasn't shocked, just with the way the offseason had worked and things that the Vikings front office had started to share. It felt like it could be moving in that direction. So, yeah, I was bummed and upset because I've told you this, Susie. I've told other people. I mean, pulling for the Vikings my whole life, growing up, born and raised in Minnesota. But him specifically, I can honestly tell you I have never pulled for a singular athlete harder than for Kirk Cousins. And it just so happened that he played for my favorite team. But just who he is off the field, on the field, the consistency he has in his own life, I just wanted him so badly to have success. And to know that he no longer would be wearing purple, that was difficult to hear.
That was super difficult. And I mean, did you feel like, do you wish that he would have fought for him? I mean, I kept wondering, it was taking so long to settle contract negotiations. And I don't know the ins and outs of it. I don't fully understand it. I don't understand it actually at all. But what I wanted for him was for them to fight for him, to say, you're worth it. We're making a commitment. But again, perhaps I don't know enough about the process. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I don't pretend to know all of it either, Susie, but there was some writing on the wall that you could start to see based on especially what our general manager, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, had started to say. And KOC loved the guy. I truly believe that through and through, and he still loves him, our head coach, Kevin O'Connell. So I understand where the Vikings are coming from and the fact that they felt like this was the time to move on. And I feel like the biggest thing that Kirk has said that would be the thing I would always circle back to is he wanted a place to retire and potentially end his career. And we weren't going to give him the term on his contract that would allow him to do that in Minnesota. Now, I would have said, forget everything else to do with the team and what you have to do to build a roster. I just want him to stay however you can get it done. But I felt like both sides understood pretty early in the conversation this may not happen. So I truly believe they tried to make it work, but in the end, it just wasn't lining up with not just Kirk, but his representation as well and his agent.
Interesting. So good. Okay, so you heard my conversation with Kirk. I would love just to know your thoughts and anything that stood out to you.
Yeah, I could go a lot of different directions with this. I mean, first, I just love how genuine and authentic he is. And I mean, every single answer that he gives you, you can tell it's so well thought out and that there's something behind it and how much he has learned in his own walk with the Lord. You know, you went all the way back to before his playing career and figuring out when did I first think you feel like I had the potential of going to the NFL and then what's happened since then. One of the things, though, I loved early in your conversation, though, Susie, that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I thought if you would just lay this statement out to believers or just average football fans, average people, whoever it may be. He talked about growing up as a PK, a pastor's kid, and how his dad would share with him and his family growing up when Kirk was a kid that being a pastor helped him be close to the Lord. And he's thankful that God placed him in that position because otherwise he doesn't know what his walk with the Lord would be like and how he'd be able to lead his family. So then Kirk flipped it into what he has done now for a career and being an NFL quarterback, saying, you know, I feel like it's the same way playing in the NFL, that it's helped me be dependent on God because I often feel inadequate in my job. He talked about it in his conversation with you, and I've heard him talk about it in other conversations as well. I don't want to say by any stretch that God didn't gift Kirk with athletic abilities and to be able to play in the NFL. You need that to a certain extent. But the more you hear him talk, the more you hear how hard he's had to work to get to the place he is because he wasn't gifted as much as, I don't know, if we want to throw out a name like Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers, like unbelievable arm talent. I don't need to get into the weeds of that football side. But if we just look at that statement, I think that would stop people in their tracks, Susie, where he's comparing himself to a pastor, where a job as a quarterback in the NFL makes you dependent on God. I feel like so many people would say, including me from the outside, well, wouldn't that put you in a place where you're on the highest, a high mountaintop when you're winning and you're doing well and it feels like life is great without God? And I have this happiness and joy filled up in my heart that feels like it's going to last forever. And actually, I have to work really hard to be dependent on God. No, he's saying on the other side, I feel so inadequate that I actually have to be that much more dependent on him. I felt like that was so awesome to hear from him so early on in the conversation that that is how he sees his career and the lens he looks being a quarterback in the NFL.
Wow, I loved that you caught that. That was a standout to me as well. And I was thinking how his family prayed the Ephesians 3:20 prayer for him, that God would do exceedingly abundantly above and beyond all we could ever dare to ask or imagine, according to his work within us. And what I also loved about that is because I've just said forever that when you are living in your God-given calling, you will be in over your head, whether you're called to the marketplace, to education, healthcare, wherever. And I think so often we relegate spirituality to people in the ministry. But we need people in sports. We need people in the marketplace. We need
Amen.
people in healthcare. And imagine if you saw your life and your vocation as a calling to the point where you dared to pray bold prayers like Ephesians 3:20, and then you put yourself in utter dependence on God. Because he's so humble. That stood out to me as well. And I've heard critics, say their thing about comparing him to Patrick and others. But he's never claimed anything other than dependence on God, and he works extremely hard to discipline himself to master his skills. And I think he's a great vessel to show God's glory because he really holds that tension. He does as much as he can, and then he trusts God to do what he can't do,
Amen. That's so good. I mean, and I think it's maybe no more evident than in that Netflix series Quarterback that I know you watched multiple times, Susie, and I watched as well. I'm not a super outwardly emotional guy, if you will, but near the end of that series when they're showing, what happened in the playoff game a few years ago against the Giants, and I mean, Kirk played unbelievably well. I could share stats with you. When a quarterback plays this well in the playoffs, they've never lost before, and of course it happened to the Vikings a few years ago because that's what happens to us. But anyway, he has that to deal with, and they're showing in this documentary, what his attitude is when he's driving home with his wife in the car and kids are asking for autographs and all that happens. And then he goes home and then it's bedtime routine for his kids, Cooper and Turner. And I'm so thrilled, Susie. I'm so glad I told you this, that Netflix left this in there where I think he was tucking Cooper in for the night, his older son, and he was praying for him. And what he was able to do a few hours after his whole season ends, one of the best seasons, if not you could say statistically the best season he'd ever have. The Vikings won 13 games and it all comes crashing down in a playoff loss. But for him to be so honest with God and then with his son too in that moment, if people haven't seen it, I'd encourage them to find a way to see what I'm talking about there. But I feel like that moment right there screams to what you're talking about, where it goes so much further beyond what happens at the football field and in the locker room, where he can flip a switch, if you will, and be that guy with his family. You don't see that hardly, if ever, from people in that public light, if you will, as a professional athlete.
Oh, such a good point. And if you do watch Quarterback, there are some, language with one of the other quarterbacks quite a bit. So just be aware of that. But to see the progression and even the contrast in that character and what you're referring to, Ryan, that doesn't happen overnight. You don't go through something like that where you're on this roll and you have a massive loss. And what comes out of you when you're bumped into is humility and honesty, authenticity, kindness to your kids. If all of your life is wrapped up in what you do, then and what you do you fail at, or something goes wrong, or the bottom falls out, everybody around you pays. But somehow he had a deep enough well to turn and kiss his wife and love his kids and entrust it all to God. I mean, that's probably what stood out to me in that series, but also in this conversation, is just how steady he is, and humble he is. He's not trying to be anything other than who he is. And his standard challenges me so much because he's so disciplined, yet so humbly dependent. And I'm thinking, Ryan, if, like you said, in all of our callings, what if we applied those two things, where we tried to master our craft and then we ask God to do the impossible in and through us? What might happen?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an awesome question, Susie. That's so good. And, you talk about being so consistent in everything that he does and pouring everything he can into the game, but yet not sacrificing what's on the other side of that and what his family life is and how good of a husband he is, how good of a father he is, how good of a friend he is. I think about when you and him talked about that off day, the Tuesday that he sets aside every single week during the football season to say, this feels like it may not make sense when I tell it to my coaches, but I'm going to put all the work in Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if it's a Sunday game or whatever else it may be to lead up to the game that week. I'm going to be 100% in on these days, but I am not sacrificing the rest of my life for the sake of maybe a few more hours in the film room or working out or throwing passes on the practice field. You mentioned in your conversation with him, I believe it was Calvin Miller, you said, a quote that was on your husband Kevin's desk. What was that quote again?
Yeah, I said, Lord, help me to remember I can make more bricks in 6 days than I can in 7.
Yes, thank you. That's so good. And I love that you told him that, Kirk, it's evident in talking to you. You said something along the lines of that it's obvious to see that you have built a life that extends far beyond the football field. And we see that in the fact that you sacrifice that one day. And, you know, last year he got so much hate for it. I mean, something as simple as he took his kids last second to a Twins playoff game on a Tuesday, but later that week we were playing the Kansas City Chiefs. And that photo went everywhere, Susie, as you can imagine. And all people caption is, do you think Patrick is away from the facility on a work day Tuesday when he's coming to Minneapolis to try to beat the Vikings? Looks like one guy wants to win more than the other. And it just, that kind of stuff just makes me so upset and drives me up a wall because as Christians and believers, Susie, like we see he cares so much more than what just happens on the football field. But that's not to say he's letting his teammates down, his offensive line guys. If you want, you know, some truth serum on what teammates think about Kirk Cousins, just look at what Brian O'Neill, Garrett Bradbury, Christian Darrisaw, look at what those guys said a few hours after he tore his Achilles in Green Bay. And that's all you need to hear about him as a teammate, where he is not sacrificing his will to win, his desire to be there for his teammates and do whatever he can to win. No, he just values his family and his wife and his kids and all that at the same level also in addition to that.
What were some of the things these guys said about him after he had his injury?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're emotional and they're upset because, you know, I can still remember Kirk throws that touchdown pass to Jordan Addison and we're breaking the game open and the look he gave Kevin O'Connell on the sideline and he's fist bumping and we're running away from the Packers. And, you know, Susie, you and I love it when the Vikings go into Green Bay and beat the Packers as Viking fans. But, you know, then a little bit later on in the game, he tears his Achilles and you guys had an awesome conversation about that as well where, you know, the trainer told him, like, Kirk, I can confirm you've tore your Achilles. Obviously, your season's over. I'm going to leave the blue tent here. I'll give you like 3 minutes to be alone, and then we'll let you know when the cart comes over. And he shared with you, like, that's just time between me and God to really, again, center myself and remind myself that I'm stewarding my career. I don't own it. And that's, I'm sure, easy to say on the outside and now being removed, but to say that in that moment, and I think he even said in that moment, he's saying, God, I wish you owned differently. And that this wasn't the reality, but this is what it is. I can't tell you exactly what they said after the game, Susie, when it comes to Brian and Garrett and Christian and the rest of the offensive line. But, you know, just stuff where I'd do anything for that guy. I love that guy. And I hate that this happened to him of all people, and I don't understand. So there's a lot of why questions, I'm sure, that were being asked, not only by Kirk and his family, but also his teammates on that day in October.
And there, you know, people watch us when we proclaim Christ. They watch us, and for him, they get a front row seat to see him discipline himself, work really hard, graciously manage his critics, and then he's sitting in that blue tent and with a season-ending injury, and it goes back to how you opened the show about surrender and change. I feel like when you walk intimately with God and you daily surrender in the little things and you daily course correct as the Lord leads, you're conditioning muscles, you know, in your infrastructure so that when the big things happen, you're able to navigate that. I mean, I know it was painful. I know he grieved, but he still surrendered. He still adapted to the change. And I feel like as painful as this was, it grounded him even more. Like he just had a deep, deep sense of who he is. I could just tell.
Yeah, I mean, God provided it for, you know, a witnessing opportunity for those around him. Not that he couldn't witness to other people when he was healthy and we are winning. And after the terrible start in September, this train's back on the tracks. We feel like we have the best team in the North, whatever it may be. But you're put in a different place, if you will. And in a different conversation, I heard him talking about his rehab, Susie. He talked about where he wanted to be the leader of the guys who are on IR, who weren't playing for the rest of the season, and really pour into the rest of those guys. So that was awesome to hear him talk about specifically those group of guys who just, quite honestly, he normally is not hanging around because he's with, Kevin O'Connell during the week. He's with the other quarterbacks. He's with his quarterback coach and figuring out that whole thing on the practice field with the rest of the team. Well, you're put in a different spot when you're on IR. And he also knows in the back of his head, he doesn't know for sure that he's leaving the Vikings, but he knows, okay, my last chunk of months here may literally be a lot more in the training room and trying to remedy this and knowing I may never step on the field again wearing purple. But I got to honor God through it at the same time, even though I don't know my future. So cool to hear how he's able to pivot, Susie, is what impressed me so much.
It just speaks volumes. Again, you got the critics who will critique all day long, and but they're not the ones on the field. But when you think of people up close, when they see when a leader of a team has a chance to mentor or to be so self-serving that they are threatened by the young people coming. All those things speak volumes, and people see it, and people notice it. And I think his witness is so steady and consistent that I do believe God's going to honor him. I believe some of his better days are ahead of him, but I don't want you to speak to that yet because I'm going to ask you that in a minute. But I asked you ahead of time, what can I ask him? What do you want me to ask him? And you had this great question. And if you'll notice, friends, when you go back and listen again to my interview with Kirk, I referenced this question. I referenced Ryan, and Kirk goes, oh, good question. So I'm just saying, he's a sportscaster. But you asked me to ask him, when you're entering a new organization, how do you step into the opportunity with confidence and authenticity without coming on too strong, but then definitely rising up to the challenge to be a leader? What did you think of his answer?
Yeah, I like how he mentioned and how he said so many times throughout his conversation with you, Susie, that he didn't just say, okay, I'm going to try to figure this out on my own and do the best I can. He didn't name the guy, but he said he reached out to, I think, a now retired quarterback, and I'm filling my brain with names as I heard you talking about that with him, who he may have reached out to, but how they handled that. When you're with one or two organizations before and you flip to somewhere else and you're near the end of your career, how do you handle that? And I loved his answer of, you don't change who you are. You're still authentic to who you are in that spot, but take a back seat. Value the opinion of others. Don't be constantly the guy up in front leading right away. Ask a lot of questions. See how they do things, but then also understand, Susie, that's the beauty of, and it goes into that in the Netflix series, the position of quarterback is literally unlike any other position in all of sports. We're not just talking football. We're talking any sport that you play. And many people say it is the hardest position to play in all of sports. And it goes beyond just what happens on Sunday where you're trying to complete passes before you're hit by 300-pound linemen who are running full speed at you and you're going through a car wreck every week, as Kirk has talked about. But you are expected throughout each and every week to be the leader. There is no quarterback in the NFL who's starting who can say, yeah, I'm not going to say next to anything. I'm kind of going to do my thing, stay in my own lane. I kind of feel like an introvert. Susie, I know you're more of an introvert. I am as well. But even if you feel that way, you can't just sit in that spot. You have to lead, and you have to set the tone. And any good or successful football team that you find, whether we're talking high school, college, or at the highest level in the NFL, you have to lead well. That goes so much further beyond the field on the Sunday, Thursday, whenever it may be. And you're also the guy who they're going to put on the podium after the game in your lowest of low moments or in your highest of high moments, and you're going to come back on Wednesday and preview the next week. You are the face of the franchise, whether you want to be or not. So I like how he also understands I'm not just going to drop my role as a leader, period, and say, oh, I'll wait a while and maybe I'll start to pick that up when we get to training camp and we get to the dog days of August. No, that has to be a part of it. But I also know that I need wisdom from someone else. So I love how many times, not just in that answer, but in other spots of your conversation where he said, I needed to reach out to this person and see how they got through it because I'm trusting that I don't know best. And we talk about the book of Proverbs, Susie, from earlier. What does a wise man do? Seek the opinions of others and value those above your own.
Boy, that is so good. Just a few more questions for you, Ryan. You touched earlier on his comment about being a steward versus an owner. Any more thoughts on that for you, just personally, as you heard him talk about that?
Yeah, I love how unique that is in an answer to give. If it's, any local or national media person, I think about asking a guy a question like that. if it's any athlete, okay, you tore your ACL or you tore your Achilles, or a pitcher in baseball has Tommy John surgery. How often does an answer pivot like that? Like I mentioned earlier, I love how many pivots he has to just say, guess what? Like, it isn't mine. And, we talk about stewardship often here just at Faith Radio as a whole, Susie, if we wanted to pivot into that, not that we have to, but guess what? As believers, like, we don't own any of it.
That's right.
It's easy for me to say that right now. It's easy for anyone to say that, but that's the truth, is we don't. And when we start to relinquish that ownership and start to see ourselves as stewards of everything God has blessed us with, His presence becomes more of a reality in our lives. And I love what you share so often, Susie, on Faith Radio. You're constantly saying God does not want something from you. He wants something for you. He wants to bless you in ways that you can't even imagine when you step into faith in whatever it may be. And so, again, I go back to that moment where he's in the blue tent and he's been trying to learn that process he talked with you about recently, trying to say, God, I'm the steward of what you've blessed me with in this career. I don't own it, but it would sure feel like to me, Susie, like I own it when I'm the one going up to the podium multiple times every week. I'm the one expected to break down the huddle at the end of a big win, and I'm the one expected to give the speech to the rest of the guys before we head on the road in the playoff game. It feels like I kind of have some ownership, but you don't.
That's a good point, because he also has to own mistakes, even mistakes that he wasn't responsible for, but his team was. That's expected of the quarterback, to take responsibility.
Yep.
So he's taking ownership in that regard. So that really does take profound humility to be able to say, I'm going to buck up, Buttercup. I'm going to show up, but then I'm going to offer it all to him, the praises and the critiques,
Yeah, it's said by so many, but I believe it, Susie. I mean, the position of quarterback, especially in the National Football League, when you're winning and doing well, they honestly, most of the time, probably are getting too much praise. When you're not doing well and you're losing, they're deserving way too much blame, because it goes so much farther than just them. So I can't imagine living in that. Wow.
Okay, what do you anticipate seeing from Kirk in this next season? What's your gut feeling?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, I hope he's healthy and feeling great heading into the season. And then, so much expectations can be put on any guy moving teams after they had success with their past team and what we saw most recently of them. And then you throw in the wrench of he's coming off a serious injury and he's playing with a totally new offense, different coaches, all that. I understand why he made the move to Atlanta for football reasons on top of, his family reasons and getting closer to Julie's family, which is awesome to see. But I expect them to win in a division that honestly feels pretty up for grabs and isn't great. Carolina was an utter mess last year. I don't feel like New Orleans is good. They're middle of the road. And then Tampa, made a run with Baker, but I feel like Atlanta could win their division, the NFC South. And every single game that they play, outside of one where they're going to come to Minnesota in the winter on a game that's going to be unbelievable. But I hope he experiences a ton of success, but I would just say it may not happen right away. So we'll see what happens.
Wow, interesting. And then what about the Vikings? How do you anticipate our season shaping up?
Yeah, Susie, it's a phrase that's used often in sports, and so many times it's not the reality. But I believe with the Vikings, it is a competitive rebuild. They have remade so much of the defense, which I'm excited to see. And, obviously the quarterback position is different, and everyone wants to see that with how many games can Sam Darnold play before the whispers start to become louder than whispers for J.J. McCarthy to take over, and when may he get his shot. So that is interesting for sure, but I hope the defense is better. It's got to be better. I believe it'll be better. I feel like they made a lot of good moves in the offseason. And I'm not expecting the playoffs, but I'm also not expecting what some are saying where, they'll maybe win 4 or 5 games. They're going to finish last in the North. The teams around us have gotten a lot better, and that's what's tough. The Bears, the Packers, the Lions are all in the up, so it's not going to be easy, but I expect us to be somewhere near 500, and we'll see what happens.
Wow, very good. Last question for you. Any other teams that you're excited to watch this year?
Well, obviously Kirk in Atlanta. I could go down the line with so many different teams and places. I mean, Houston, they had an awesome year last year, and I just think of them because C.J. Stroud is a strong man of faith, and he's talking about his faith in Jesus all the time to the media whenever they let him do so. So I'm pulling for Houston on that side in the AFC, and I like Baltimore as well, and watching Lamar Jackson. And I enjoy football like you, Susie, so I could go on and on, but I'll stop it there.
Yeah, 49ers are fun for me to watch as
Yeah.
well. Appreciate Brock. So
Yes, absolutely.
that's awesome. Well, Ryan, we got to do this again. We have to do this again when the football season rolls around because I'm going to have lots more questions, and I'm just going to assume and believe that other listeners are going to want to pick your brain too. So let's do it again. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie. I'm absolutely in for that.
And bless you, friend. Thanks for tuning in. And I pray you've just found so much encouragement today. And we love doing this journey with you. Be encouraged. Walk intimately with God. Try to approach your calling as a steward, not an owner. Try to dare to do your best. Discipline yourself. Get focused. Be purposeful. Throw off things that hinder, the sin that easily entangles. Run the race before you. Do what you can do. And then ask God to do what only He can do. I think that's the stuff of miracles. We'll meet you back here next time. Thanks for listening to this conversation from Susie Larson Live. These podcasts are available because of your support. You can become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. And thanks for sharing this audio link to spread the good news of the gospel and to grow the impact of the show. Also, if you would, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast today at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player and never miss a show again.
On the latest episode of the Wow God Stories podcast, we go to Africa.
I was raised in Sierra Leone in a community that truly lived the phrase, "It takes a village."
Until one day, the world outside Anita's village broke in.
I didn't grow up in a war zone, but I watched one unfold in the country I love.
God brought hope to her story and many others through radical provision.
God began to direct us towards Uganda, Africa.
I was born and grew up in the countryside of Ethiopia.
Nanja and I met in Kigali, Rwanda.
Discover how God showed up in the middle of war, loss, and impossible odds in Africa. Stories that'll make you say,
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow God Stories, wherever you get your podcasts.